Boldwood presents Winter at Wishington Bay, written by Maxine Morrey, and read by Gloria Sanders. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Morning, Sophia. Ernie raised a hand, being kept toasty by a thick sheepskin glove. Bit nippy today. I waved back and nodded in agreement, the bobble on my woolly hat bouncing as I did so. Just a little. I grinned at both him and the typically British understatements. It was absolutely bloody freezing. Wrapping my coat a little tighter, I dug my hands into my pockets and hurried along the cobbled village streets. Now that the bulk of the tourists had gone for the winter, it was easier to do without having to negotiate round the shuffling window shoppers of summer who filled the narrow pavements during the high season. Not that Wishington Bay ever entirely closed. Its renowned beauty and relatively sheltered position made it popular even out of season, and of course the brilliant reputation of Ned's restaurant, where I worked as a waitress, brought people from miles away all through the year. I took extra shifts at the restaurant whenever I could, which on many occasions was over a weekend thanks to one particular colleague, Corinne. She'd been hired by Ned as a favour to old friends and was apparently there more for the life experience rather than any need to earn a decent income. The latter part was covered most indulgently by her father, allowing Corinne to be far more concerned with fitting work around her social life rather than the other way around. My own circumstances, however, dictated that I would never turn down the opportunity to earn a little extra cash, and why I was now hurrying along the road that led towards the edge of the village. The idea that I would ever be in a position to need to earn money at all was still one that occasionally took some getting used to, but I had, in general, adjusted fairly well to this new circumstance, and thanks to Carrie and her sister-in-law Holly, I was on my way to the first day of another new venture. As I turned into the private lane that led down to Holly and Gabe's house, I looked across from the raised position and took in the curve of the bay, the pale sand today edged with a sea of bright turquoise. Above it, puffy white clouds chased each other quickly across the blue sky. The sun shone, although there was little warmth from it, but the rays caught the tops of the white horses as they danced across the water before breaking onto the shore. I took a deep lungful of the cold, sharp air, tasting the salt in it, and smiled to myself, realizing that despite my reduced circumstances, I was lucky to have ended up at Wishington Bay. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I snapped a couple of pictures of the beautiful scenery to upload onto my Instagram later, before heading on down the lane towards the house. How the world turns, I thought, not for the first time that morning, as I gave the toilet brush a thorough exploratory trip under the rim. 18 months ago, I had never cleaned a toilet, and most certainly had never had any inclination to. Now, here I was cleaning them for strangers. Well, not exactly strangers. The house belonged to Holly, and until she and Gabe had become an item over the summer, he'd been renting the other side of this gorgeous Art Deco semi. Now, they were both living here, in what had once been Holly's grandmother's house, and which Holly had completely renovated during her enforced sabbatical from work last year, and both were full of the joys of young love. I only hope it stayed that way. But I'd seen the way they looked at each other, so I had a good feeling about it. Love had to have a solid foundation on which to build, and they, like Ned and Carrie, seemed to have been lucky enough to find the right person to help grow that love and strengthen the relationship. I'd already popped next door and given it a quick flick with the duster and vacuumed round. With the two of them off taking a long overdue holiday, Holly had asked me to keep an eye on things, and now I was back in their half of the house, The difference that Holly had made to it emphasized how outdated next door was now, making it seem more shabby than it really was. But I got the feeling it wouldn't stay that way for long. Gigi, Holly and Ned's grandmother, had been a wonderful woman by all accounts, and from what Carrie had said, her death had completely devastated Holly. It had taken her granddaughter a year to even set foot back in the house that had almost been the sole source of any happiness she'd had during their childhood. But coming back to Wishington Bay had proved to be another pivotal point in Holly's life. It was that kind of place, I knew that from experience. The people here were special, and the village itself had something almost magical about it. Even if you didn't feel you belonged anywhere, even if you walked in one day with everything you owned in one bag and had no clue what your next step was going to be, all the while wondering whether you'd just taken an enormous one in the wrong direction, Wishington Bay took care of you. It wrapped its arms around you and whispered, "It's going to be okay." Of course, I hadn't envisioned my version of okay would include cleaning other people's toilets. But beggars can't be choosers, and it would have to do for now. If Holly had had her way, she'd already have started transforming next door, but on this point, Gabe had managed to get her to see that she was at risk of setting herself up for exhaustion again. Exactly the situation that had forced her to return to Wishington Bay in the first place. So, after consideration, Holly had acquiesced and admitted that he might actually be right, agreeing to slow down with her new endeavours, for now at least, especially in light of the surprise Gabe had in mind. Nate McKinley wasn't due in until this evening, but I wanted to make sure everything was in place and as comforting as it could be for his stay. Ned and Carrie, and by extension their family, had been so welcoming to me that I felt personally compelled to ensure that Gabe's brother felt welcomed too. It wasn't great timing that his trip was coinciding with Gabe's surprise holiday for him and Holly, but, from what I understood, it wasn't a visit that his brother had been planning to make at all. At least not for a while. The rocky marriage Nate had been struggling with for years appeared to have broken apart irreconcilably some months ago, and having spent hours on the phone and Skype to his brother, Nate had finally accepted the offer of coming to stay at the house. I wasn't sure exactly what his job was, something to do with safety and the airlines, from what I could gather. Gabe had told me that Nate had been a consultant on some TV series about aviation accidents, as well as a couple of big-budget action films, and had now been asked to write a book on the same subject. He'd negotiated the time off in order to write it, but with the deadline creeping closer, the stress of his marriage, and then its complete implosion, Gabe was clearly worried about his brother. Holly's suggestion of Nate coming over and using their house as a retreat and a quiet place for him to just reset and write had seemed the perfect solution. The timing may not have been great, but at least Nate was going to have company in the form of Gabe's mostly sausage dog, Brian. At the moment, the pooch was lodging with Carrie and Ned, a situation they were both happy with, but Gabe had argued that with the restaurant plus Holly's 1-year-old nephew, they already had a lot to deal with, and Brian would be good company for Nate. It was pretty hard to be sad or gloomy when you had one of the cutest dogs in the country by your side. I finished the bathroom and then moved on to the rest of the upstairs, giving it all a dust and polish so that it was gleaming when Nate arrived. Once that was done, I moved downstairs and made sure everything was perfect there, too. Labeling the last container, I checked the fridge over one more time and closed it. That should keep him going for a while, anyway. I pulled out a pad and pen from the basket I'd plonked on a kitchen chair and began writing. Dear Nate, welcome to Wishington Bay. I hope you had a good flight. Everything is pretty well stocked, as per Holly and Gabe's instructions, and there are 3 meals in the fridge ready to be heated up to get you going, plus a couple of fresh soups. I did check with your brother if there was anything else you didn't like, so hopefully these will be okay. I know Gabe has mentioned that I am happy to come in and cook for you during your time here, so once you've decided whether that's something you want to go ahead with, perhaps you could let me know? I've put my phone number and email on the bottom of this note. and we'll be back next Thursday anyway to clean if I don't hear from you before. Good luck with the writing." I chewed the pen for a moment, unsure how to finish off the note. I'd unwound a lot since I'd made my home in Wishington Bay, no longer feeling the need to calculate every word of everything I wrote in case someone took it the wrong way, or double-checking I'd used exactly the right words and tone to ensure I was making precisely the right impression. But Gabe and Holly were my friends, and I wanted his brother to feel welcome, especially as he'd been having a tough time, and so I was eager to do what I could to help. In the end, I settled for just Sophia to the note, adding a smiley face next to it before popping the paper on the table, tucking the very corner of it under a vase of white lilies already wafting their delicious scent through the house so that Nate would see it easily upon arrival. Nate McKinley was a man of few words, the opposite of his brother, whose open, easy manner was perfect for his career as a paediatrician. Nate's serious manner suited someone who spent his days thinking about all the ways a plane could crash. But still, a thank you text wouldn't have hurt, would it? "I'm not sure he's going to be that thrilled to have me interrupting his day," I said to Carrie as I popped my head into the restaurant a week later to say hi and double-check my waitressing shifts. "You're not interrupting. You're there to do a job, he knows that." "What's he like?" I asked. Carrie gave a bit of a shrug as she transferred the little one to her other hip. "Quiet. Shyer than Gabe, but he'd just stepped off a flight after a 24-hour journey, and his wife's flounced off with her tennis coach, so it's not surprising he wasn't at his chattiest when he came to pick up Brian." "You think he'll look after him okay?" She flapped a hand. "Absolutely no question. There's no way on this earth that Gabe would have left that dog in anyone's hands he didn't trust. You know that." I nodded. Gabe had rescued Brian as a tiny puppy, having found him injured and abandoned, shivering in the pouring rain on a city street. He'd stuffed him in his motorbike jacket, raced to the veterinary practice where Carrie worked, and begged them to save him, whatever the cost. Brian had been lucky to last the night, but to look at him now, you'd never have known he'd had such a tough start, and he and his burly 6'4" guardian angel had been pretty much inseparable ever since. Hopefully, Nate was just as crazy about the little dog as the rest of us were. The doorbell tune echoed round the tiled hallway. I had a key, of course, but it didn't feel right to just let myself in, especially as I still hadn't received any sort of reply to the note I'd left. I shifted my weight to the other foot, then rang again. Nothing. Slightly hesitantly, I plugged the key into the lock and turned it. No small rocket of fur and energy came flying at me, and there was a stillness to the house. "Hello?" I called out, just in case, my voice echoing a little in the entryway. Silence. "Mr. McKinley?" Should I call him Nate or Mr. McKinley? I hadn't even thought of that. Cautiously, I moved into the kitchen and called out again, but there was no reply. Well, I couldn't stand there all day. I was there to do a job, and if Nate McKinley wanted to make sure he wasn't going to run into his cleaner, then so be it. That was, of course, his prerogative. I knew from past experience that some people could make a variety of assumptions about others based entirely on their jobs. I was ashamed to say that, at one point, I'd been one of them. But my eyes had now been opened to the world in a myriad of ways, and I was proud to say I was no longer like that. If Nate was, then he really was different to his younger brother, and not in a good way. "I assume you must be Sophia?" Holy shit! I jumped, stumbling backwards. I steadied myself on the side of the bath as the toilet brush went skittering across the floor, and stopped within millimetres of the feet of a tall, broad, very serious-looking man with a quiet but deep Australian voice. Chapter 2. The scampering of tiny feet alerted us to incoming company in the shape of a mostly sausage dog. The love and energy wrapped up in the tiny ball of exuberance that was Brian, with a Y, completely belied his difficult start in life. while we were all crazy for the little dog and his antics, it was hard to tell whether Nate felt the same. Glancing at his face, it was hard to tell anything much about him at all. His expression was blank and unreadable. Brian's eyes brightened as he got to the doorway and saw the new toy sitting at the feet of his temporary master. His tiny paws moved on the spot, desperately trying to gain traction as his snout pointed forwards and he launched himself towards it. Realizing what the dog had in mind, I launched myself in the same direction, determined to grab the brush before Brian got his jaws clamped round it. However, as I did so, Nate languidly scooped the dog up with one hand, his little paws still running in mid-air, and I whisked the brush out of the way with an urgency that now seemed faintly ridiculous. I realized I was also now awkwardly close to Nate McKinley. This definitely hadn't been the introduction to my client that I'd expected or wanted. Firstly, I'd sworn at him. Well, not at him, but sort of at him, and now I was half kneeling at his feet, brandishing a loo brush. "Hi," I said, desperately trying to act as if this was a perfectly normal introduction. I'd had a lot of practice at acting as though everything in life was just perfect, so at least I was putting some of that experience to good use. I took a step back as I did so, gaining a little more personal space between us, and saw a brief flicker across his face. Facing him now, I yanked off my rubber glove and held out my hand to shake his. "And yes, I'm Sophia. You must be Nate." He nodded briefly and shook my hand even more briefly, as Brian whined and wriggled under his arm. "I expect you'll want to clean that before I put him down," he said, nodding at the floor. "Oh, yes, of course," I said, pulling my glove back on. "I'll get onto that now." He nodded again. "We'll get back out of your way." And with that, he turned and headed off downstairs, taking Brian with him. I hadn't even had a chance to say hi properly to my little canine friend. Letting out a tight sigh, I finished scrubbing the toilet with so much vigour, powered by irritation, it was a surprise there weren't shavings of porcelain flying off. It was hard to believe this man and Gabe were even related. Gabe's open, friendly manner couldn't be more different to this man's guarded, cool one. Not one smile had passed his lips, which was a shame, as it looked like it had the potential to be a very attractive mouth. Or maybe that was just as well. Who knew? It was probably a good thing Nate McKinley was only staying temporarily because, as welcoming as Wishington Bay was, that attitude certainly wouldn't endear him to the villagers. Okay, so it probably wasn't ideal that I'd flung a used loo brush in his direction, but it was an accident, and it was partly his fault for creeping up on me anyway. And I certainly wasn't happy about his insinuation that I'd been preparing to leave the floor unmopped after the toilet brush incident either. I might have been new to all this housework stuff, but I'd discovered I had rather a talent for it, and even found it quite calming. Gorgeous but moody Australian men aside. I'd even started an Instagram account to document tips and tricks I employed, along with other little moments of my days. Obviously, I didn't use my real name, and never featured on it at all, but I enjoyed sharing and often picked up quite a few likes. I took a couple of deep breaths and calmed a little, having now moved on to the bath, the rhythmic movement of cleaning it helping me relax. I was doing this for Holly and Gabe. That's what I had to remember. Just because Nate McKinley was the unappreciative type, I wasn't going to let it spoil my day. I also reminded myself that Nate was going through some marital problems, and I knew from experience that that didn't always make you the cheeriest clown in the car. So I was happy to cut him some slack on both of those accounts. But still, manners cost nothing. I finished mopping the floor and smiled, pleased with the shine I'd polished in. I knew Nate had no cause to doubt my cleaning duties, as I'd done a trial run for Holly before she left, and she'd been thrilled. I gathered my supplies in the little caddy, and tried not to let the fact there had been no "thanks for the meals you left, they were delicious" either. Just thanks on its own would have been nice, even though I absolutely knew they were delicious. I stood and stretched, giving one last look around the now gleaming bathroom. The toilet roll holder was full. I'd even done the pointy thing with the first sheet, and a bundle of spare rolls lazed in a wicker basket next to the wooden ladder towel rail, where bright white fluffy towels resided. A pop of bright orange was added to the white bathroom by the vase of fresh flowers I'd stood on the deep windowsill. Standing back by the door, I pulled my phone from my pocket and snapped a couple of pictures. To be honest, it hadn't been in that bad a state, considering there'd been a man living here on his own for a week. Amazingly, even the toilet seat was down. But I got a sense of satisfaction from seeing the taps shining and the modern suite clean and bright, as the low winter sun beamed through the softly frosted glass of the room. Having dusted and cleaned upstairs, I popped downstairs to fetch the homemade air freshener I'd mixed up yesterday, using some white sage oil I'd picked up in the crystal shop in the village at the weekend. Not only did it smell wonderful, it was said to have cleansing properties and improve the energy of a space. I wasn't sure if I believed all that, but it was a nice thought, and from my brief encounter this morning, a little less negativity around here wouldn't do any harm. From the corner of my eye, I saw Nate sat at the lovingly worn oak dining table, a laptop in front of him. He wasn't typing, just staring at the screen, apparently engrossed. Brian was out like a light in his bed, upside down, feet in the air, head lolling to the side and snoring gently. Nate might not be great with manners when it came to humans, but obviously Brian had had a great time on his walk this morning, so there was at least that in his favour. People who were kind to animals generally got a bit of a head start when it came to likability in my book. Judging by the deep furrow on his brow, writing, or rather thinking about writing things plummeting to earth at speed, required a good deal of concentration. Thank goodness I'd finished downstairs while he was out this morning. I'm sure roaring round next to him with the vacuum while he was trying to work would have just about topped off the opinion he seemed to be forming of me. Putting the appliance I'd used earlier back in the cupboard, I returned the cleaning caddy and my gloves to the cabinet underneath the sink and grabbed my coat off the hook. "I'm finished now, Mr. McKinley." After his rather frosty manner earlier, I'd decided that the formal address was the right one to go with. "So I'll be going." Brian stirred in his bed, sleepily opened one eye, and then spun round and out of his bed towards me, leaping half elegantly, half hopefully at me as he tended to do, with the innocent belief that whoever he launched himself at was going to catch him. "Hello, my darling," I laughed as he wriggled in my arms and snuffled his nose into my neck for cuddles. "You obviously had a good walk." "Run?" I looked up. "He had a good run. I run and he keeps up astonishingly." I couldn't help wondering what would happen if he didn't. "Well, that's lucky." Nate gave a small head tilt, an action that reminded me of his brother. "I would have slowed if he couldn't. Don't worry, I have no plans to abandon him on the beach." "I didn't think for a moment you would." I tried to laugh it off, but knew the tinge of pink on my face probably wasn't helping my cause. "My life wouldn't be worth living if anything happened to him." "No, he does mean the world to Gabe, and Holly too now, of course," I said, as I released a clearly still snoozy Brian back to the floor, whereupon he toddled back to his bed, pulled Petey Prawn closer with one paw, and laid his head on him, sleepily watching us. In response to my reply, Nate merely gave another of those short, annoying nods that seemed designed to cut off all conversation, and we stood there awkwardly for a second. "Is there anything you need?" Frankly, I just wanted to leave now. Nate clearly didn't want any company other than that of the little dog, but Gabe had made me promise to keep an eye on his brother. Nate might be the eldest, but it was obvious Gabe had concerns about him, knowing he was going through a tough time.
Need?
Nate frowned. Yes. I shifted my weight and tried not to show my impatience. It wasn't exactly a hard question. Food? Supplies? Anything? He shook his head.
No, I'm good.
Thank you. I smiled tightly.
Thank you,
he added, causing the pink tinge to once again flush on my cheeks. Growing up, I'd always been lauded for my peaches and cream complexion, but the truth was, it gave me away far more than I'd have liked. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of a smile hover on Nate McKinley's features. But an instant later that impenetrable expression was back, and I concluded it must have just been a trick of the light, from the low sun flooding in through the wall of glass doors Holly had had fitted to make the most of the view onto the beach. Right, I'll be going then. Enjoy your day. He gave a small shrug, nodding towards the open laptop on the table. Oh, I see. Well, at least you're getting out with Brian on the beach, that's good. And there are plenty of places to explore round here, even in the off-season. I added, keeping my promise to Gabe, who was worried his brother may just hunker in and write. I knew that Gabe's hope was that Nate would, at the risk of sounding a bit new agey, spend some time rediscovering himself. From what I'd heard, his wife had been pretty high maintenance, but Nate had been well and truly smitten. But, without give and take, any relationship is heading for stormy waters, and Nate gave everything according to Gabe, whose normally smiling mouth had been set in a thin line when he'd explained. But he wasn't going to discover much about himself sitting in front of a screen for the next couple of months. I had the distinct feeling that Nate really did want to be left alone, but I'd made a promise to people I cared about. Nate looked back at me. I mean, I can show you some if you like. Take you to some places that have become favourites for me since I moved here. His intense blue eyes were fixed on me for a few moments, the silence broken only by the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock and Brian's soft snores. And then he smiled, but it wasn't a proper smile. It was tight and awkward, and the sort of smile you're given the moment before you're told you're fired, or dumped. Admittedly, I'd not had a lot of experience of the first, at least not as the fiery, but I'd certainly been dumped a few times, and I had a strange feeling I was about to get so again, by someone I wasn't even dating.
Sophia?
I tilted my head in question, mirroring his earlier action.
I'm sure you're a really nice woman.
Where was he going with this? I try. He shifted position, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't look as in control or collected. Clearing his throat, he started again.
I know my brother's been worried about me, and while I appreciate his and Holly's offer for me to come here and any other arrangements they might have made,
I drew myself up, feeling every muscle within me tighten, my voice cutting across his. They haven't made any arrangements with me. I knew the colour was back in my face, but right now I didn't care. I was more concerned that Nate McKinley seemed to think I may have some sort of side business going, and I didn't particularly appreciate the suggestion.
No, I didn't mean...
He ran a hand across the hint of dark stubble that shadowed his chin. Didn't mean what exactly?
That you...
He faltered. Brian had now woken again, apparently picking up on the tension filling the room, and he toddled over, stopping by Nate's thickly socked feet. He gave a little whine, and Nate bent and scooped him up.
It's all right, mate,
he said quietly, rubbing his thumb over Brian's silky head. The little dog looked over at me as if he wanted me to confirm this. The distraction seemed to have given Nate time to collect and organise his thoughts.
I'm just aware that Gabe knows I've been unhappy, and now he's all loved up. He's in that position where he wants everyone else to be too. I'm sure you're really nice and everything, but I'm definitely not looking for anything to happen over here. I'm not interested in exploring or anything like that either. I just needed somewhere with peace and quiet where I can get on and write this book. Had I known my brother and Holly had other ideas, I might have made different plans.
I stared at him for a moment, shook my head, and headed towards the back door to let myself out.
Sophia, wait.
I didn't, but the words were burning inside me, and I'd spent a lifetime not saying what I felt. I'd made a promise I would never do that again. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but at least I now knew I was being true to myself. Having pulled open the door, I turned back, coming face to face with Nate, who had crossed the room after he'd called. He was closer than I'd planned, which was a little unsettling. There was quite a lot of Nate McKinley, in a good way, which was inconvenient, but thanks to his superior attitude, he'd made it incredibly easy to ignore anything I might ordinarily have considered attractive about him. "Just so you know," I said, looking up quite a way up at him, "your brother and Holly had no such ideas as those you're suggesting. As much of a catch as you seem to think you may be, I'm certainly not looking for anyone either at the moment, and if I were, well, let's be honest, shall we? You haven't exactly endeared yourself to me so far. Gabe and Holly are just concerned about you, and everyone knows that shutting yourself away isn't good for mind or body, so a bit of exploring might not have hurt you, but clearly you're intent on staying inside your cocoon, except when Brian forces you out of it, and that's your prerogative. People in this village care about each other. It's just the way they are, and I, for one, have been grateful for that. Obviously, it's not really your thing, and that's fair enough. But it might be wise not to assume there's some hidden agenda behind everything. Sometimes people are just nice. I would have thought you'd have realized that as Gabe's your brother, but maybe not. Perhaps you should have made other plans, as you said. It sounds like a hotel room in a faceless city might have worked just as well, if not better, for what you wanted, rather than somewhere people might actually care and take an interest. However, I, for one, won't make that mistake again. I'll be back to clean the same time next week if you want to arrange your dog walk so that I don't disturb your work." With that, I turned back to the door, used all my willpower not to storm out, and instead left in a calm and controlled, outwardly at least, manner, not waiting for Nate's reply. Chapter 3. As I stalked back up the hill towards the centre of the village and my cosy little flat above Flora's gift shop, I turned things over in my mind. I wasn't exactly thrilled I'd let off a rocket at a friend's brother, but if anything was said about it later, hopefully I'd be able to explain my actions. And I stood by what I said. From what I'd seen, the eldest McKinley brother would have been better booking into some bland chain hotel back in Australia, and saved himself the airfare, not to mention all the work Holly had put into making the house welcoming for him. When the plan to get Nate over was originally being hatched, Gabe, being a bloke, had fully intended to put his brother up in the half of the house he had rented from Gigi, and subsequently from Holly, until they got together. Holly, however, had other plans, claiming the other place was too dated and not homely enough. It hadn't bothered Gabe, and possibly wouldn't have bothered Nate, especially since it appeared his plans involved him barely looking up from his computer. But Holly was adamant that he should have a warm, welcoming home to come into, and had insisted he stay in theirs, which, now she'd finished, was like a high-end show home. It really was stunning. And she'd added lovely little touches like a small glass bowl of what she knew to be Nate's favourite sweets on the coffee table, and a couple of magazines in subjects Gabe had told her his brother was interested in. Not to mention arranging to stock the cupboards and fridge with his favourite foods. I felt a pang of sadness for Holly, that all her hard work to make the man who was to be her brother-in-law feel welcome had apparently gone to waste. Reaching my front door, I waved through the shop window at Flora and headed into the warmth of my flat. Collecting the post, I rifled casually through as I climbed the stairs, unlocked the interior door, and headed into the kitchen, putting Nate McKinley firmly out of my mind. Opening the photo app, I added a no-filter hashtag to one of the views of the bay I'd taken earlier and uploaded it. There was no location added. It was pretty unlikely anyone from my old life would ever discover my account. There were no exotic getaways, designer clothing, or name drops posted on my feed, which meant it was far below the notice of the set I'd once been a part of. But I liked to make sure. I'd shut my old life away, separated myself from it entirely, and I wanted to keep it that way. I'd deleted all of my previous social media accounts when I'd walked out on my old life, and I'd been careful to keep things vague on my new Instagram. However, I happily scrolled the ones I followed, and having my own again gave me an outlet to share my days beside the sea along with what filled those days. Next, I chose the photo I'd taken of the sparkling bathroom and pressed share to my Instagram stories. I added a cleaning gif and tagged the names of a couple of products I'd used, then pressed send. I noticed a couple of direct messages and opened the first, scanned it, then moved on to the second, which was of a similar ilk. I'd had a few like this now, and I deleted these two just as I'd deleted the others. I wasn't entirely sure if they were genuine anyway. Both of these today purported to be journalists looking for more information on me and my account, saying how they loved what I was doing and how they'd like to feature it in their magazines. The fact that I'd tried to use natural and eco-cleaning products and made my own products like those used decades ago in fancy houses seemed to be quite a large part of the appeal. But even if these things were genuine, which I had my doubts about, it was the internet after all. I wasn't interested. I was happy just doing my thing for me and me alone. Yes, I'd picked up quite a few followers along the way, and the likes and views did seem to be increasing, but I wasn't looking for any sort of recognition, and I certainly didn't want to be featured in the media. I could just imagine my mother's face now, even with all the Botox and surgeries. I was pretty sure she'd manage to make her displeasure obvious. My account was just something I enjoyed, a way of keeping a record and documenting the new life I'd created here. Perhaps it was also a way of documenting the new person I'd become, a woman with new interests I'd chosen myself, rather than those expected of me. A woman with a job, a woman who actually wanted to get up in the morning. But that's all it was ever meant to be, all I ever wanted it to, and all it ever would be. If these were genuine inquiries, they'd soon move on once they realized I wasn't interested. Nobody had much of an attention span these days, and for every one person like me not seeking publicity, there would be 100 others ready to bite their hands off for it. It had been quite a revelation to find I actually enjoyed cleaning. That said, I wasn't in any great rush to take on a chambermaid job if I could help it. I'd read some real horror stories about what they had to deal with at times. But I did enjoy cleaning and tidying my little flat, making surfaces shine and everything look just so. I'd fully expected the novelty to wear off after a while, but it hadn't, and the enthusiasm had only grown. I had vague recollections from my childhood of the housekeeper using special polishes and homemade concoctions to polish this and bring a shine to that. And although I'd been fascinated, once my mother had realized I'd been spending time with the staff, she'd immediately put a stop to it. I'd missed those times. Mrs. B had talked to me far more in 1 hour as she went about her work, me trailing behind her, than my mother would in an entire week. I'd thought about Mrs. B as I'd begun learning the art of housekeeping, and wished I could remember all the tips and tricks she'd shared with me. When I couldn't, I'd begun researching old methods of cleaning, reading up about products your grandmother would concoct. Well, obviously not my own grandmother, but that generation. Accounts of how the grand houses kept their contents in top condition, both back in the day and now, fascinated me. and I loved trying some of those techniques out in my little flat. I'd begun taking some photos documenting both my experiments and the end results of a good cleaning session, which provided a record of things that had worked, and those that hadn't, as well as a way to remind myself of the buzz I got when the work was done, and the sense of calm and accomplishment it brought. A notification popped up on my phone. Someone had commented on my story. I opened the app and read the message. "Looking fabulous, told you, love. You should be getting sponsored, winky face." Flora downstairs was a big fan of my account, and having successfully put some of the tips I'd discovered into use, was now convinced I should be trying to turn myself into some sort of cleaning guru influencer. "Look at that, Mrs. Hinch," she'd said during our last chat about it all. "Book deals, products she uses flying off the shelves, TV appearances too." My blood had chilled at the thought. I appreciated her enthusiasm, but Flora didn't know the whole story. Nobody did. And I was aware my excuses probably sounded a little weak and evasive. "It's not really for me, Flora. I'm more than happy where I am." "Might save you some pennies," she added. I gave a little shrug, half in agreement. I couldn't disagree that that side didn't appeal to me, and promised I'd think about it. A little while after our discussion, I'd been contacted by a fairly new eco-cleaning brand, asking me if I'd like to try their new oven cleaner. This was one household task I wasn't a huge fan of, mostly because all the products stank the place out. So their promise of natural ingredients and low odour had caught my attention. I agreed and gave them a fake name and my address, and then did a trial of it, with a short video. I didn't speak on the film, and just added captions over the story on Instagram, but views went up, and the company must have been pleased as they sent me some more items to try. Since then, I'd had a few more trial products, and I certainly wouldn't have to spend much on any cleaning paraphernalia for the near future. So long as I kept my true identity to myself, it was a win-win situation. My annoyance with Nate McKinley's arrogant attitude didn't last long. I'd learned to let things go far more easily since arriving in Wishington Bay over 18 months ago. My time here had helped me discover what was truly important. I'd also discovered that when life hurled itself at you, you got a quick lesson in finding out who your real friends were, which was why I'd ended up alone upon my arrival here. There was no one to tell where I was. They'd all picked a side, and it wasn't mine. With hindsight, I realized that had been a good thing. At last, I was no longer being shaped by other people's opinions and actions. I was free to make my own choices, and although it had been hard initially, entirely terrifying in fact, it had also been incredibly freeing. Not to mention enlightening. I'd discovered a whole new world. I'd made true friends who didn't care who I was, or what I had, the latter being very little. And the former wasn't important. They knew who I was now, not who I'd once been. In the back of my mind, I did feel bad that I wasn't being entirely honest with the people I'd come to call real friends. They were open with me, and although I had begun to learn to trust and open up more since settling here, I still couldn't bring myself to reveal everything. Not yet. "Penny for them?" Eloise, my friend and fellow waitress, asked after she finished taking a booking on the phone. I was standing with my back to the restaurant floor, smoothing my apron distractedly. Oh," I shook my head. "Nothing in particular," I said, hoping my pink cheeks wouldn't give me away. I couldn't deny I'd been a little stung by the fact Gabe's brother clearly thought I looked in need of setting up on a date. But the brisk, chilly walk home that day had helped cool both my face and my annoyance. By the time I'd reached the top and passed by the garden at the top of the hill, still beautiful even in the depths of winter, I'd resolved to push the encounter and Nate firmly out of my mind
until I had to return for the next scheduled clean. Unfortunately, Nate McKinley had just put a big dent in my perfect plan. He was currently sitting by the window in Ned's restaurant, gazing out towards the sea, watching as pewter waves reared and crashed onto the beach. Last night's storm had lingered into the morning, and although the worst of it had now passed, the winds were still near gale force, bending the palms outside with a vigour that made me wonder at their resilience. Eloise appeared to accept my explanation, nodding her head instead towards the tables. "Hottie at 9 o'clock," she winked as she nudged me aside so she could write the reservation in the book. Ned and Carrie still favoured the old-fashioned way of booking, and I liked that. It was simple, and it worked. Why make it more complicated than it needed to be? A pretty good mantra for life, now I thought about it. I smiled to myself and wondered if I'd spent too long in the crystal shop in the village. I glanced up, then looked back, watching her write. "That's not a hottie. That's Nate McKinley, Gabe's brother." Eloise finished her task and raised her head, sneaking another glance at Nate as she did so. "Really?" she replied, smiling. "Uh-huh. The one you're housekeeping for?" "Yes." "I hope you've got a frilly apron and feather duster, then." I shook my head, smiling, and she chuckled. "We didn't exactly hit it off. Besides, he's so wrapped up in his work and whatever else, I'm not sure he'd even notice." Eloise gave me a look. "Believe me, he'd notice." She glanced over again. "Oh, if I were 20 years younger." Eloise winked. "He might like older women," I grinned back. "That's true, although we both know he'd never measure up to my Bob in real life." I gave her a little squeeze. Bob had retired from a stressful but exceptionally well-paid job a couple of years ago, and they'd moved down from London permanently to the little fisherman's cottage they'd bought decades ago as a peaceful bolt hole away from the city. Eloise had always been the sociable type, and loved to mix with people, so now worked at the restaurant a couple of times a week. Bob walked her there, and met her again at the end of the shift. Every time. The love in both their eyes was evident, and I'd have given everything to have had someone look at me like that after 4 months, let alone coming up to 40 years married. Even 4 weeks might have been nice. "You better get over there. He's already glanced this way a couple of times." "Right." Grabbing my pad and pen, I smoothed my long apron once more, pushed my shoulders back, and walked over with a purposeful, confident air, and tried to ignore the fact we hadn't exactly parted on the friendliest of terms. Chapter 4. "Good afternoon." Nate's gaze swung from the stormy sea to me. Dark grey shadows under his eyes contrasted with the blue gaze, and his skin was pale and drawn. He looked exhausted. "Hi." It looked like I'd been right on my previous assessment, as I took in the faint smile hovering uncertainly around what was definitely an undeniably attractive mouth. "I didn't realise you worked here as well as doing the housekeeping." I kept my expression fixed and tried not to bristle. He dragged a hand across an unshaven jaw. "Judging by that look you're trying not to show, I think I may have just put my foot in it. Again?" "Not at all." Crap. My really not bothered face was way too rusty. He quirked an eyebrow in disbelief. "I'm smiling." "Yep, and it looks like it's hiding a desire to write 'lace with arsenic' on that order pad." I burst out laughing, feeling my face relax as I did so. "Actually, I was only going to put 'sprinkle.' You weren't quite bad enough to deserve lace." He looked at me, that smile still in shadow. "You sure about that?" I shrugged. "We all have bad days." Nate studied me for a moment. "I guess so. And thank you. I wanted to apologise anyway, though." I waved my pad. "Nothing to apologise for. Now, what can I get you?" "I think there is." he said, ignoring my question. I'm pretty sure I was unforgivably rude.
Well, as I've forgiven you, that can't exactly have been the case, can it?
I think that just means I'm exceptionally lucky.
That too, I grinned. And then he smiled back. Behind me, I heard Eloise drop the glass she was drying, and I wasn't surprised. Nate McKinley's smile was one of those that could make a lot of women drop a lot of things. It was beautiful and unexpected, and a tiny bit crooked, which made it perfect.
I am sorry for being such an ass the other day.
It's fine, really.
It isn't, and I think you were right.
About what?
Taking advantage of the place. If I'd wanted to stay inside, I could have stayed in a hotel at home, like you said. I know Holly went to a lot of trouble to make the place welcoming and comfortable for me, and I didn't really appreciate that until you tore me off a strip about it.
I felt the colour creep onto my chest and was thankful for the high-necked top I'd chosen to wear today. Of course, that couldn't hide my cheeks, which also felt decidedly pink.
Don't be embarrassed, please, he said, his dark brow furrowing as my colour deepened. I deserved it, and I probably needed it.
I shrugged. Gabe said you'd been going through a stressful time. We're not always ourselves in those situations. He turned his gaze back to the window.
I'm not sure I even know who I am these days.
His voice was quiet, and I wasn't sure if he realised he'd spoken aloud. He turned back and looked up, the palest imitation of the earlier smile on his face. I smiled back, but as I met his eyes, I saw nothing but sadness. I recognised that same sadness, had felt it myself for too many years. My resolve was set. I couldn't fix Nate's relationship, but I could do my best to make sure this break refreshed him, and maybe he'd be able to find himself again. I knew what it was like to feel lost, and I hated to think of someone else going through that. Gabe and Holly had been incredibly kind to me, and I would do what I could to pay that forward. So, is today your first foray out into the big wide world of Wishington Bay? A hint of the smile returned.
It is. Gabe said that Ned had promised to keep a table available for me, which I know is a really kind offer, bearing in mind those Michelin stars on the door.
Ned and Carrie are big on family.
But I'm not family.
Family doesn't always mean those you share the same blood with. You make your own family, and Gabe is a part of theirs, so that extends to you. He shook his head a little as if he were having trouble understanding the whole concept.
I should thank him.
He's not here at the moment, but I'll pass it on. You can catch him another time. If you're brave enough to keep up this actually leaving the house for a purpose other than dog walking, of course. The smile widened a little more.
Did you just challenge an Aussie bloke?
I shrugged. Holly might have mentioned that Gabe has a competitive streak he blames partly on his heritage and partly on his gender.
Sneaky.
Whatever works. He laughed then softly as though he was testing something out, an unfamiliar action. I once again felt that wash of sadness and quickly covered it with a smile, hoping this time that Nate didn't see straight through it. He pulled the menu towards him.
What do you recommend?
Honestly, anything. It's all delicious.
Is the fish caught locally?
He asked, nodding towards the fishing boats moored further up the bay. Yes, every day, which is why there's a couple of things off the menu today, those with the stars. I pointed them out with the end of my pencil. The storm was too bad for the boats to go out last night.
I'm not surprised. The waves of the night were huge.
I tilted my head. Were you up? He screwed his nose up a little.
I don't always sleep brilliantly.
You do look a little tired. The shadowy smile was back.
I look knackered, and I know it.
No, not that bad. He gave me that look again. Okay. Yes, you look shattered. There, happy now. You can complain to my boss that I've been insulting the customers. Nate shook his head.
Not at all, he said, pointing to his choice on the menu. Actually, your honesty is very refreshing.
Oh, okay. A good choice, by the way. Would you like a drink while you wait? I'll bring you some water anyway.
Water's good, thanks.
Right, I'll go and put this through. A wave if you need anything else. Nate nodded, and I turned to leave.
Oh, Sophia?
I glanced round.
Thank you for all the food in the fridge and freezer. The meals, I mean. That was really kind of you. I should have replied to your note. I'm sorry.
Instinctively, I leant over and